And we're going to take a journey together. This afternoon, searching for the Holy Grail. And then we'll have a ritual celebration at 7:30 this evening. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping details. I don't know, is there anybody here who's never been to Grailvile before? So you may have noticed the sign at the door. Unfortunately, because of the nature of this ritual, in which everybody on the staff at Grailvile is participating and needs to be over there by no later than about 6:15, 6:30, and we're ending at 5, that there really wasn't time to prepare dinner for people who are staying over between the two events. And we want to apologize. Generally, that's not the Grailville way, but because of the circumstances, we had to do that. And so our apologies. And if you're looking for some recommendations on places to eat, those of us who are on the staff, let's raise our hands. Staff people on Grailville staff. Nobody's raising their hand. Without recommending restaurants. That's all it is. Okay. Gee, listen, why don't we start out with a song? Okay? Yeah, why don't you? One of the sheets of paper you have in the door gives you the words of some of the songs that we'll be singing and practicing this afternoon, and which will be sung this evening also.
I'm calling this my journey song, and it's an Appalachian song, and it's very simple, and yet I think in its simplicity, it brings up many of the times in our lives when we reach a place where we can't go alone. And that's part of what our whole ritual is about. It's called The Water is Wide, and the words are on your paper. Sing it through once, and then if it's well enough, I'm sure you can all join me the second chapter. This is a dulcimer, by the way, where I start. An old Appalachian instrument, which kind of goes with the song. The water is wide, I cannot go home, and here have I the wings to fly. Help me build a
I think I probably first started thinking about this Grail myth and Grail theme, it must have been back in the early 80s. In the context of my membership in this international movement called the Grail, which is the international movement of which Grailville is the center. So I was belonging to this movement called the Grail, and at a certain point began to wonder, first I knew there was this Grail myth, saying, what is it? And it only seemed appropriate that I would begin to try to understand better what that was. And at that time we were having a general assembly, and I wrote a poem for it. And the way that poem began was, imagine a cup, glowing with light and cold. It is manna, blood and wine, honey wine, sweet elixir, something to make us well again, something to make our land well again, a great cauldron of flame. Try it. Reach out. Reach. So that was back in 1981. Time passed by. I had done, a rather large poem. We were working with it a bit in the Grail, but I still thought, I don't know what it is. It seems so complex and so many pieces of it that I wasn't grabbing hold of. And then we came to the 50th anniversary of Grailvile. It was looming on the horizon, and somehow that thought plus the thinking about who we are as Grail as a whole and Grailvile's meaning came together, and so, by some arrangement, either I volunteered or people asked for something, I don't remember, but I remember I said on November 1st, I will do a poetry ritual theater piece. I will have it ready called The Surf Law. I didn't have a title yet. I said it was dealing with the Grail myth material. So that was the deadline. I had about a year to do it. And I entered into a year of extensive research. It was research that was done at a level, I think Robert Graves once said, at a level of research that's called, you enter into the material and you enter into a kind of poetic reverie. In other words, I wasn't accumulating data so much as reading the images and the archetypes and the themes and all of the different ways in which people were speaking about them. And what I found is that there is an enormous body of scholarship and work and artistic reflections and takeoffs from, and there's just lots and lots and lots of stuff out there, and I was grabbing it and reading it. And somewhere in that level where the unconscious works and creativity comes, themes and images and symbols began to emerge. And the result of it was the ritual you'll see tonight called Encircling the Light, in search of the Holy Grail. How I got to that title is a whole other story about the process that I will share with you later. Pam, would you mind giving me a glass of water? So I wrote the piece, and we did it, and even at the time we were thinking, there is so much that was packed into that hour in terms of references to the myths, to the legends, the symbols, the archetypes. Lots of people were saying, and Jean Wilson, you even said it the first night you came to be part of this presentation this evening. Do you remember what you said that night when we first looked at the script? Because you had said at the first performance on November 1st.
I can remember the feeling after the first performance. I'm not sure if that's what I said that night. But after the first performance, I wanted to get a hold of the script. I felt a real need to see these words. And because so many of them came at me so fast, and I couldn't put them with all the symbols that quickly, and I wanted to look at it in more depth.
And also what you said at times that you were being carried along by a certain feeling level,
right?
Not really understanding, right. And you wanted to understand better. And that was some of the feedback also. So we said, well, let's do a seminar this time. And that's what this is. And in preparation for it, I had to switch into a whole other side of the brain, which is not necessarily about poetic reverie, but trying to be able to explain these things that I found in some more of a factual, substantial way. So that's what I'm going to try to do this afternoon, to the best of my ability. And we're going to break this up into two parts. One will be, I will give you some background in terms of the myth, its origin, where it came from, what the influences were, and the historical and cultural context into which it emerged, but that's also significant. And we may in fact find some parallels in our own time. And to do that work, and to look at the three main, what's called, as one of the diagrams shows, the three main branches of the stories as they evolve. We're known as the Celtic branch, the Christian branch, and the alchemical branch. And so we'll look at those three, and the similarities they share, and some of the differences. And out of all of that, we'll have a break, we'll have some questions, discussions, a break, and then look at specifically the circle and the light and its relationship to that material. And also an opportunity for some small pieces for you to be prepared for working in tonight during the ritual itself. You folks will be kind of the add-on. We've had a core group of people who have been doing this in rehearsal for about 3 to 4 weeks. So 2 nights a week we meeting. And then towards the last week, or actually the second last week, one other person came along, and then last week somebody else came along, and then at the dress rehearsal, 3 more people came along, and now you're the final. Actually, you're not the final layer, you're the next layer. Because tonight, it will open up to all of those who just arrived for this evening also, and they will also be included. All right, so we'll find some ways in which you can also be part of this evening's ritual, if you feel comfortable doing so. I have some thoughts on that. Okay. That said, the Grail myth, as I said, has an overwhelming body of scholarship related to it. And it's kind of amazing that it has and continues to generate so much thinking and discussion and artistic creativity around it. The first known written version of it emerged around 1190. So it is about 800 years old, the first written form. At that time, between that time and 1225 approximately, you could say over the course of 50 years, all of the basic Grail texts were written in the course of about 50 years. That does not include Thomas Mallory's version, which came in around the 14th century. But this was clearly derivative of that. And everything else that came after that period, around 1225, was obviously derivative of what had been written in that 50-year period. Is there anybody here who has never heard of the Holy Grail? Before maybe you saw of course you've heard it, and then you saw the flyers and all of that. But is there anybody who's never heard of the Holy Grail? Has anybody here ever read one of the original sources, one of the original stories? Which one did you read? Craig Tanner. One of the few people, really, who has ever done that. Yet all of us have heard of it and have some familiarity, some words that we might be able to associate with the curious myth. A myth that has never been really read, but yet is known, and functions in that kind of an archetypal way for our culture. And continues to be alive. We see it emerging in different ways, even in our own time. Apart from Monty Python Search for the Holy Grail, right? I don't know that one. There has been Star Wars, which is clearly related to that quest. What other things? Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Right, and there was that. Of course, the beautiful book, The Myth of Avalon, which was the first thing that I read as I was coming into it. It's a beautiful book. And the more I come to learn, the more I realize the level of study that she did to write that, put together the material in any way. You have, of course, Eliot's Way, a little bit further back, T.S. Eliot's Way, the poem The West Wind, which was clearly and obviously influenced by the Grail legend, but through Jesse Weston, who was one of this century's great scholars, writing From Ritual to Romance, The Quest for the Holy Grail, other books. I'll be speaking about her a bit later as we go on. And she has a fascinating theory in relation to all of this. We have Wagner's Parsifal. You can go on with a list. Lots of artwork. It's a theme that keeps recurring. And right down to you read a newspaper, a feature article, somebody's thinking on or reflections on things, and they'll always make a comparison. It's like searching for the Holy Grail, or is it all for the Holy Grail? It just keeps coming up within the culture. Something that, as you say, was written 800 years ago. Now, the first thing to know, there is not one, but many stories, many versions, many ways of talking about it. And even for what we call the cup, in many of the versions, it is not a cup. And that often comes as a surprise. Reading from Jessie West, and she runs a summary of some of the many things that it has been in there. It's a mysterious, it can be, a mysterious and undescribed food-providing object which comes and goes without visible agency. It is a stone, endowed with food and life-giving properties, which also from time to time assumes the role of an oracle. It is a holy object, the form of which is not indicated, wrought of gold and precious stones and emitting a brilliant light. It is a reliquary. It is the dish from which our Lord and his disciples ate to pass the lamb at the Last Supper, or the cup of that meal. It is the vessel in which Joseph of Arimathea received the blood which flowed from the wounds of the Redeemer. Finally, it is a mysterious combination of these two latter forms with the chalice of the Eucharist. Even in this final, highly ecclesiasticized shape, the Grail retains traces of its earlier origin, appearing and disappearing automatically and mysterious, and as one romance definitely states, being of no material substance whatsoever. In quotes, for of wood was it not, nor of any kind of metal, nor of stone was it wrought, neither of horn, nor of bone. There are all those versions of what it was. A few more. It variously appears as a dish, a cauldron, a chalice, a cup of the Last Supper, the emerald which fell from Lucifer's crown as he plummeted to hell, a philosopher's stone, and a beatific vision. So within all of the stories that we call the origin of this legend and myth are these various ways in which the form of the Grail was received. Now the quest itself, someone mentioned the quest, is as varied as the vessel thought. It is seen as a search for the ultimate source, a search for the cauldron of rebirth, the fountain of everlasting youth, direct communion with God through the body of Christ, enlightenment, individuality, God, or simply the avenging of a blood feud. The Grail cannot really be separated from the undertaking of the quest for it. Both Grail and quest, the goal and the process towards that goal, embody the ultimate human fulfillment, whatever form the author wishes it to take. And what we will see in the stories is different ways of also looking at that quest. Now, the time in which this emerged. The first thing to know is that it, of course, came out of Western Europe, the written form. Praetorian Detroit, which was Crampton, or what later became Crampton. I'm not sure if it was called that at the time. It was certainly part of the territories of Henry II, so that the territories of Britain and France were at that time ruled by a British king. But really the only strong social structure and the most powerful social structure that was holding all Europe as a whole together was the church. And that church was, first of all, fresh from a period of the Crusades. Somebody mentioned the Crusades. that the holy city had in fact been won, but very quickly lost. There was a tremendous religious fervor surrounding this effort to get back to Jerusalem. In a way, this wasn't for the rare itself. At the same time, these crusades were taking place on the heels of a millennial movement, of a millennial time, much as what we are in now. It seems that, and scholars who have studied it, that whenever we come up to one of these millenniums, what happens is we take on a certain spiritual and at the same time apocalyptic vision of reality. We expect the world is going to come to an end. And very often when this anticipation is spiritualized, it takes the form of finally the completion of the book of Revelation, or the age of Aquarius, or the coming of the new age, all of these different varieties of ways. It is a tremendous amount of anticipation of the transformation of the human species and all of our social structures and ways of living in the physical realm of this planet Earth. So it was a time that had that kind of anticipation around it, the turn of the millennium, and then guess what? The world still went on. It remains to be seen if our own millennium will have the same outcome, or in fact, maybe this time it's for real. Now, the Crusaders were off in the Holy Land, conquering and being conquered. And an interesting thing happened while they were there. They got to meet the knights on the other side. They came into contact with another civilization, which they found in many ways superior to their own. This is the culture of Islam, which, unlike her, which was emerging from the Dark Ages, was in fact a highly civilized, educated, and searching, and I'd say enlightened culture. And they found themselves fascinated by this culture. And in many ways, taking on, surprisingly enough, as they were there fighting for the Holy Roman Empire, taking upon themselves some of the notions of the people they were coming into contact with. Most noted for this infiltration and cross-fertilization was a group called the Knights Templar. Has anybody heard of the Knights Templar? Now, this was a group of knights that had been founded by Bernard, Grailvile, who also founded the Cistercian monks. And basically, they were warrior monks. They were trained to follow a very similar religious code as the Knights Templars were trained in. As the Cistercian monks were trained in. But they were going to go out and fight and be warriors for Christ. And these Knights Templars were among the most intrigued by the culture that they came into contact with. And in fact, came back not only tremendously wealthy from the riches that they had looted there, but also espousing certain forms of heresy, which became part of the Cathar and Albigensian heresies, which were ultimately repressed in around this time also in which the Grail sort of emerged. And we find probably a strong connection between these heresies and the stories that emerge. That's why I'm going to it, because we'll come back to it in a minute. So there was a lot of Europeans coming into contact with the ideas of Sufism, mysticism, the traditions of the Tao and the Buddhism that was also infiltrated through Islam, through the Middle East, and through these contexts. Also, Spain and Portugal at that time were also being colonized by the Moors. And so through northern Africa, through Spain, also these Moorish, Islamic, Sufi mystical notions were also penetrating into Europe. In fact, Europe at that time, and these movements, by the way, these heresies were becoming a movement to the extent that eventually Crusades were sent to stamp that out, and the Inquisition was also about the stamping out of these heresies, not only about getting rid of the Jews and the Moors, but to eliminate these basically Gnostic, esoteric forms of Christianity. So, these ideas were coming in. There was a movement, particularly in the southern Europe, that was growing around these things. And in a way, Europe was sort of at a threshold of perhaps turning in another direction. This did not happen because ultimately the Inquisition stamped these things out, and it was basically the mainstream Roman Catholic Church which ultimately came to prevail. But the Grail legend emerged at this time when these forces were at work. Also, this was the time of the Enlightenment of St. Francis, who was also walking around, probably one of the great mystic figures of the Church. It was also, at the same time, the rise of courtly love, which was right back in the East. At that time, before that cross-fertilization from Islam, women had reached a real low point in terms of their the level of respect which was given to them. But through the contact with the East, courtly love came in. And what that meant was, although we may not see its value at this time, at that time, it placed woman on a sort of, as we know, pedestal, which was taking her from here and putting her up there. And it espoused the type of love which, in fact, was not about consummation, and usually took the form of a knight being enthralled by a woman who was, in fact, married to somebody else who was not close to consummation. Lancelot and Guinevere are archetypes of that kind. At this was coming. Well, this sometimes, well, Lancelot and Guinevere were, but suppose it shouldn't have been. Now, simultaneous to this, with the rise of the woman, also was coming the rise of the Virgin Mary and the cult of Virgin Mary, which, in fact, for a period of time, the Church also tried to suppress, but ultimately could not, and continues today, certainly in Southern Europe, as a strong factor in the religious life of Southern Europe. Excuse me?
Why were they trying to keep the title?
Well, maybe that will emerge as we continue. So, it was, on the one hand, at the same time, an age in which the wasteland was clearly evident. You had the small kingdoms warring against each other, armed knights, bandits were roaming the countryside, pillaging, raping, spoiling crops. Turns out at that time there was a period of really bad weather, so they weren't getting, they weren't having lots of crops. And peasants were selling or trying by whatever means they could to get to the Holy Land in order to have achieved some riches. And in some cases there was also a tremendous amount of religious fervor. The Church, while having a certain ambivalence in relation to all of these things, was in some ways also participating in it. There were, in fact, saint relics available in practically every church of the time. One reading from this book, The Holy Road, which I'm reading a lot from, by the way, it's one that I strongly recommend to people. It says, sacred, supernatural, and miraculous relics flooded the marketplace. Every abbey or ecclesiastical center advertised its authentic saints, its holy remains, the numbers of its pilgrims, and the frequency or power of the funerals. It was into this highly charged, hysterical religious atmosphere that the legend of the Grail was born. Now, at the same time, coming from the north, through the the bards, the troubadours, the British, I can't also speak French, contours, the French contours, were the oral tradition of the Celts. It had not been written down, but was being carried through poetry and through this bardic tradition. Included in here were certainly the stories of Arthur. This king who probably, if he existed at all, existed around the 5th or 6th century. Probably wasn't terribly important in his own time, or perhaps he was, we don't know. You can't find a whole lot of real historical information about him, but he has lived and evolved and grown through the tales that were down to us through the culture. But more than just about Arthur, it was about this fantastical world of fairies and supernatural beings, of disappearing castles and shape-shifting women who would be birds, and then they would be beautiful maids, and then they'd be lowly hags with big faces. And everything kept shifting and changing. There were an overwhelming variety of magical and mysterious powers. And all of this was mostly revolving around the tales of Arthur, but not only. And the Europeans were fascinated by it. This combined with all this new mystical information and practices coming in from the East came together and gave birth to the Grail. Now, it's odd that the story about the British king would come out of France. For whatever reason, all of the forces coalesced there, and Chrétien de Troyes was the first to raise it. Now, that itself was the foundational text, and everything else was built on it. Stories, characters, symbols, and themes. A heck of a time on how to organize certain material and have it also work into something we could present about this evening. And finally, what I came down to, I was able to extract the basic format that the stories could all fit into, including a circle line. Isn't that great? And that was sort of, this is after the fact. I did the circle of life as various themes, but as I began to understand and extract the story of, the basic storyline of all of them that they could all somehow fit into, I realized that was true for what I finally came up with in terms of circle of life. So I'm going to follow that through on some of its variations, and then once we get to also talking about the evening's ritual. All right, now Chrétien de Troyes first. He first began at this point, introducing the Grail hero, which for him was Parsifal. This piece, The Paradise and Fall part, was written later in another book called The Elucidation, which many say really didn't elucidate anything at all, it just added more mystery. But it was written after the fact. But keeping that in mind, I will begin up here, just so that you begin to get the flow from beginning all the way through. Beginning with the elucidation. De Troyes talks about a time, a nameless time, in a kingdom called Logres, L-O-G-R-E-S, when all was in perfect harmony and balance. It was paradise. And it was a time in which there was also a perfect balance between what was called sovereignty. That is, the women who were the keepers of the waters in that kingdom. The women who lived in the castle of the maidens, kept the waters, kept the land fertile, and in collaboration with the kingship, the male ruler, kept the kingdom not only fertile, but in social order. One day, though, one of those kings, even though any knight, any king, could come to the castle of the maiden and be assured of any drink, any food that they desired, one day, one of these kings Argonon decides to come and to rape her, to rape the keeper of the waters, and all of her other maidens. He and his men did this, and they stole the sacred vessels. Thereafter, the women would no longer provide the water. They withdrew it, the land became a wasteland, and social chaos was the outcome. That is his story of the original fall. Interesting to note, and as we get to the Christian version, of course, the background will be the fall as we know it from the Bible. That in this case, it was a man who was responsible for the fall. So, thereafter, the object of any quester was to reconcile the kingdom and the social structures and the male kingship once again with sovereignty. Who was the one who was the bridge between the other world, that is the goddess, and the physical world as we know it. This world, from here, but also what came into the legend, was one in which the physical world as we know it was living in a parallel existence with this other world, where sovereignty and the women who kept the waters were. We see that who's read the Myths of Babylon? And so we know that book, and we know that always it was like Glastonbury Tour, which was once sovereignty's main site, was coexisting in the same space simultaneously with the cathedral that had been built upon it. And somehow you would pass through the mist and you would come into this other world. It's a realm in which time and space don't function in the same way as which we're accustomed to think of it. And so the object was for these knights, in order to save the land again, to find a way to cross through to that other world that they had lost access. And the way to do that was through various acts in which they would once again be trustworthy. Certainly there were the ones who was about being strong and masterful and competent in terms of the arts of war and things of that. And that was the code of chivalry by which they lived by. But here comes that irony. They were going off in search of the divine feminine with swords and war in their hearts. And the more they pursued that, the more they found themselves failing. And finally, it was only by coming to terms through the women who in fact hadn't completely abandoned them, but would enter into their world in various shapes and forms and be challenging them. Thus we have the lowly hag, who when she is kissed becomes the beautiful maiden and will give him a secret to help him along the way. Women are constantly appearing throughout the stories in one form or another with some kind of message or instruction. Eventually, they would manage, some of them, and in this case it is Percival, who does in fact manage to break through. The way the story begins is he is with his mother. Here's the woman thing again. The story opens, Percival, the innocent fool, as we'll find out, and his mother, who has tried to keep him from the world of men, from the world of the knights, from the world of the warriors. And one day, a group of Arthur's knights go passing by, and he's so entranced by them. He wants to find out who they are. And he says, "Mother, I'm leaving you now, and I'm going off to join the other knights. I want to live that life too." And it sent her into such a throes of grief that eventually, once he is gone, she died. He never knows it. This is the innocent fool. He doesn't know the consequences of his own actions. But yet his mother had given him a certain amount of training and always said to him, just be sure that when you find the right woman, that you kiss her ring and you embrace her. It was always about the woman is the one you should be looking for, and she will show you the way. He goes off on his journey doing various deeds that the knights do in those days. and proves himself, in fact, through certain kinds of trials where he does become gradually slightly more conscious of the consequences of his actions, does, in fact, eventually come upon the wasteland. He comes close to the Grail Castle. All of these usually emerge together. You have a Grail Castle that is being guarded by a wounded king who is the king of what is essentially a wasteland. He comes upon the wasteland, meets the wounded king, who directs him to the Grail Castle, where he finds this magnificent procession of beautiful maidens, at the same time, though, hearing the wailing of women in the background and not knowing where they're coming from. It is a procession with strange objects. And each of the processions has a similarity in the objects that they present. But I'll read you this one from Troy's version of what that procession looked like. So a youth enters the hall holding a white lamp, from the tip of which oozes a drop of blood. Two more youths appeared, carrying candelabras, followed by a fair maiden who held a bejeweled golden grail in both her hands. She was beautiful, gracious, and splendidly garbed, and as she entered with the grail in her hand, there was such a brilliant light that the candles lost their brightness, just as the stars do when the moon or the sun rises. She was followed by another maiden, carrying a carving dish. The procession and the grail pass before them once more, as the company are all eating. But the young knight, Percival, does not ask who the grail served or what the procession signified. He puts off asking the question until the morning, for fear of offending. These are all the basic themes. The Grail procession occurs with all these strange objects and these people and these sounds, beautiful aromas, very often paradisal music. But the knight does not ask the question he's supposed to ask, which is ultimately the question that will heal the wasteland and bring him to attainment. The right question, generally, is one of two kinds. It is either, what is the Grail? Who does it serve? I mean, the question is like a koan, if you can think of it. Why this question? What's so important here? Obviously, because it's usually giving food to the people. Who does it serve? It serves the people who are here. Or what? Maybe there's something more to it. The other kind of question that often needs to be asked relates to the wounded king. And it's about Percival. It's generally Percival. The only other one I deal with is Galahad. It's supposed to be so moved by compassion for this wounded king, he's supposed to ask him, why do you suffer? What ails thee, uncle? It's usually uncle, in fact, there's a blood lineage. And he doesn't ask it because he has been trained to not ask too many questions. That was part of the social code. May, in fact, be part of our own social code. And it was that simple. The only thing that stopped him is that somewhere between his mother and the king, he had in fact found the teacher who trained him in the social codes of the time and told him, just be sure you don't ask too many questions. So he doesn't. He loses the opportunity, wakes up in the morning, everything's gone. He has somehow gone out the door, usually thinking, oh, they must be out hunting. Everyone's gone, the Grail's gone, it's no longer luster, and finally can't find it, it's gone, the castle has disappeared. And what he meets outside is a woman, in one form or another, who tells him, you dolt. You were supposed to ask him what the Grail was. Or you were supposed to ask him why he was wounded. He spends generally the next 5 or 10 years trying to find a castle again because he can ask the question. Now he's got it. And in the course of that, being purified more and more, coming to a kind of enlightenment which is usually about the consciousness of who his true self is. A stripping away more and more of these social garbs that he has been made to or chosen to put on, going through various trials and tests, including the temptation to remain at court. And one of the crones will come and call him various names and make him feel so bad that he finds, okay, I gotta go. And makes a promise of some kind to continue the quest. And then finally, we'll come to attainment. However, what happened, an interesting thing happened for Chrétien. He never finished it. He just stopped writing it. Gawain, the parallel hero, achieved something called the Castle of Marbles, liberated the maiden women who had been kept prisoner there. And that happened for Gawain. But then the story suddenly stops. They're waiting for Arthur to come to some tournament. And the story's over. And we leave Parsifal with a monk in a state of purification. He never gets there. Not because Chrétien resolved it in that way, it's just it's an incomplete story. And that incompletion is perhaps one of the reasons that made everybody want to jump in on it and finish it. And so for the next 50 years, you had these various authors emerging who took it on and worked it a little bit differently, maybe, added in some things in one way or another, and came to a completion of that story, of that original story. Now, when the Cistercian monks came to the story, something called the Vulgate cycle, they turned it around a little bit. Certainly, you've got the situation of the initial paradise with Noah, with the fall of Adam and Eve, and all of that that's going with the human condition. That's always in the background. And then the coming of Christ as the Redeemer of that initial fall. The one who gets the cup, in this case, is Joseph of Arimathea. He catches the blood of the Savior. He becomes the keeper of that cup. He has a whole group of followers around him. He and perhaps the others are in prison for a time. Christ appears and tells him he's supposed to take this cup, he's supposed to do these miraculous things with it. He tries to follow it all. He's going to use prison. Eventually makes his way to England and establishes a church at Glastonbury Port. Dedicated, by the way, to the Virgin Mary. Built on the grounds that had once been founded. So, that's the backdrop of that story, and then passed down through bloodlines from Joseph of Arimathea, through his son, and once again in a state of blossom. Now, the Christian story, the Vulgate cycle, opens up with the introduction of the hero Galahad. But this time, instead of beginning with the mother and Percival, it begins with Galahad being presented by 3 nuns. 3 nuns bring him to the court of Arthur and ask for him to be knighted into the fellowship of the Round Table. He sits in the seat perilous, which was supposedly the seat that no one could fill. It had been reminiscent to the Round Table was taken off from the table of the Last Supper, and one seat was always left empty, because that had been Judas's seat. Someone had to come along to redeem that betrayal. And you would know the true knight, the true attainer of the Grail, by the one who would sit in that seat. It was called the Siege Perilous, and in fact, Galahad comes in, sits in it, no problem. So, okay, you're knighted. And that's how the story begins. So, once again, the 3 nuns bring him to the court, he is knighted, and he sets off, it's Pentecost. This is the time of Pentecost. I want to talk about red. I want to talk about blood, roses, Pentecost, the color of red. All of these things keep emerging. Basically, the Grail story is about blood in one form or another. Woundedness and blood. And there are certainly parallels we know that come out of the Celtic tradition and the cauldron and all of that. Very often in other Celtic versions of the Grail legend, part of the Grail procession, is a head in a dish full of blood. We don't know the meaning of these things. These are remnants of ancient rituals that are still.
Is it a man or a woman?
It's a king's head. It's a king's head in blood on a dish. Also, in all of the Grail processions, there was a woman who was carrying the Grail. Never a man. What did you say?
I said it's probably a woman and a father. Never.
There's always a sword dripping blood into the cup. And there is always a spear which takes various forms. Sometimes even it's just a candelabra. Okay. So, those are things that exist in all of these processions. And it's Pentecost, and what happens? The knights are gathered around the round table, pretty much like we are here at the table moment now. And all of a sudden, there's a blast of light. Oh, first, wait, before there's a blast of light, the day before this happens, some woman comes by to tell them that the Grail is coming. She's the messenger. And you know the world. Listen, I'm going to tell you she's coming. Be ready, it'll be here on Pentecost. And she's gone. And then those Pentecost are great blast of light, overpowering. Here comes the cup, float to the table. And everyone suddenly found their plate, whatever food they loved the best. And they could eat it, fragrance, aroma, music, they were transported into bliss. This was the Holy Grail, and then it was gone. Quickly the cup was gone. And everyone would say, I gotta go. I gotta go find this thing. I gotta give my life to finding this thing. And in fact, it was that quest for the Holy Grail which destroyed the companions of the Round Table forever. From there on, they never were able to bring it back together because they were all off on their own quest for this thing. It became so obsessed with it that this social fellowship was no longer able to maintain itself in the way that it had. And so Arthur's kingdom thereafter was to decline. I don't know the meanings or how all of these things fit together. I'm just giving some of the details. That's why people spend their lives trying to interpret it all. Because there are so many mysteries connected with it. So, interesting, this is the Christian variation on is God, the appearance of the Grail. And it doesn't quite fit in the same way. It's not like the hero goes out on the journey, comes to the wasteland, the Grail castle, doesn't ask the right question, then goes off on the quest, but rather the Grail appears. This whole part is just sort of collapsed in on itself. The Grail appears, they all go off on the quest toward attainment. Has various adventures. These parallels here with Lancelot, Bors, Gawain, a whole bunch of them. They're out looking, going through their adventures. All these adventures are interrelated with each other, and it's all about each of them finding out that they are or aren't worthy to achieve the Grail, and going through certain kinds of purification, or not. Like Gawain, suddenly stop finding out he's clearly too sensual. Because one of the things about Galahad, unlike Percival, he was absolutely chaste, and that was the primary prerequisite in the Christian version for attaining the Grail. It was written by the Cistercians. It was written by the Cistercians. And of course, their model of the Grail Knight was like the Templars. It was like their own monks. So what they were holding as the one who would be most worthy would be the one who would be most in keeping with their order's version of ultimate holiness and worthiness. Now, there was, however, within all of this, something really interesting going on. And it was about love. And ultimately, it was about love that would get you there. And there was a certain stage of evolution of love that was going on. Here we go. At the time of the 12th century, a major concern of the times was the nature and practice of love, both carnal and spiritual. This interest culminated in the doctrine of being more in the course, that's what we were talking about, and in the course to produce the mysticism of Bernard of Clairvaux. According to the adepts, The love of God begins with the soul's love of itself for its own sake. It proceeds to the love of God for the self's sake. The love of God, and then from there it goes to the love of God for God's sake. And this is the interesting. And then finally, the love of the self for God's sake alone. Bernard is an interesting character. He's an interesting person. And in fact, at the time of the suppression of the heresies in the South, he had in fact gone down there to meet with people and returned to report that in fact he didn't find anything so terribly wrong, although he didn't approve of all that he didn't find it that way. So that these versions, written by the Cistercians, were about that type of transformation, that ultimately it was this perfection of union in the state of love that would lead to the attainment. So, Galahad certainly is the first real hero. But along the way, Percival, who vows, even though he has known them, he vows to no longer know them, ultimately becomes worthy, as does another one called Board. An interesting thing happens here. The three of them get to it, have various stages of bliss and enlightenment in the presence of it. They are informed, and now this Grail, okay, this appearance of the Grail is different from that. It's not exactly like the other one. In this one, once again, we're still traces. We have 4 maidens bringing a bed with an old king upon it. Josephus, the first Christian bishop consecrated in Saras, this holy city in the east, descends as if in a vision and officiates before the Grail. 2 angels bear candles. All right, the boys use our carrying candles now. It's 2 angels who are carrying the candles. A red cloth and the bleeding lance which drips into the vessel. They still got the bleeding sword in there. You may say, why? In a Christian myth. Josephus takes bread from the holy vessel, and the figure descends, becoming a child, and enters the bread, which quite clearly took human form. A naked Christ then appears from out of the holy vessel and feeds them with the bread. Here's the food thing. He tells them that they have won a place at his table, which has not happened since the Last Supper when the 12 disciples were here. They learn that the Holy Grail is the platter from which Jesus Christ partook of the Paschal Lamb with his disciples and comes to place. Even though it wasn't a procession, he tells them that the Grail is this platter. But that they must leave Britain, they must leave love, because that realm has lapsed into dissolute and worldly ways and no longer serves the Grail. Britain is no longer worthy to harbor such a glory. Galahad mourns in Percival on his journey to the holy city of Saras, but not before Galahad heals the maiden king with blood from the lamb. Always the healing happens with the same thing happens. The wounded is something different. It's the sword that wounded that ultimately heals. So they take this off in a boat to Saras, and there they go, and they get it there, and it goes to its proper place. Galahad, of course, just wants to die. Like, he's finished. He's finished with the life of the flesh. He's ready to go. And finally he does. What happens when Galahad dies is that a hand comes out of heaven and takes the cup away. Earth is no longer able to hold it. The lack of worthiness is no longer proper place. So that, unfortunately, I say unfortunately in my own way of looking at it, in this Christianized version of this, the cup is removed from the physical realm. Perhaps if we study more, if I study more, I can see some ways in which we still are able to have access to it. But then it's gone. Percival dies a year later. Boys go back to Camelot to tell everybody what happened. And that's the end of the story. What we do here, see here, is a kind of split between the physical and the spiritual realms, ultimately. Because of where this physical thing that's manifested divine is removed from our presence. Then we come to Eschenbach. He's my favorite. And he takes it, once again, through Parzival and the mother, the whole story of the mother. Parzival asks his mother an interesting question in the very beginning of it, after he's killed a bird. And suddenly he begins to cry because he didn't realize that by shooting the arrow into the bird it would die. That unconsciousness. And he begins to weep mournfully. And he says to his mother, "But mother, what is God?" And she says, "God is this absolute light, brighter than the sun and the stars." That question would come back again throughout the course of his journey. Parzival's journey is a journey of doubt and search. Coming into greater consciousness of the consequences of his actions and coming to terms with understanding the effects of what he does and the resolution to learn from that and to do it differently. Percival, which means Percival, is to walk the middle way between two peaks. It's about and basically the doubt. The story starts out with Percival being introduced in the context with his half-brother, who is a black boy. His father had had 2 wives, had born 2 sons. Percival doesn't find out till the end about his brother. The black and the white, the dark and the light. These are the things that are constantly playing in Essenbach's story. And Percival, over and over again, is having to learn to walk the way between extremes. Very often, to get to where he's going, he lets go of the reins of his horse. And discovers that only when he tries to hold on to the reins of the horse is when he doesn't get there, and if he lets it go, the horse will take him. This is the lesson over and over again. Through his coming together in his perfect love with his woman, earthly love with a woman, he is driven to say, "I have to go find my mother." And instead of finding his mother, he finds the Grail. His mother has died, and the search takes him, and we're closer to this Grail, once again going through all the process, failing to ask the question, realizing, oh boy, I made a mistake, I got to give up that idea about not asking too many questions. And finally does, in fact, achieve it with his black brother. They both get it together. First he gets it. He has been, through a series of circumstances and coincidences, reunited with his brother, who first of all he was fighting to kill. They thought they were warring with each other. And in the course of having, fought with integrity, begin to have a conversation and discover they both have the same father. And he said, when I was fighting, it felt like I was fighting with the other half of myself. So they go off together to attain this Grail, come back to the castle, and there it is. The only problem is that Fearfeed, his brother, can't see it. He sees a beautiful woman carrying it in and falls immediately in love with her. But he does not see the Grail. And because he loves this woman so much, he is willing to be baptized into her religion. And at the moment of his baptism, there it is. He sees the stone, in this case it's a stone, because Wolfram has very strong alchemical and astrological influence in his work. Each chapter, each episode relates to something in astrology that's a whole little thing. Now, here's the interesting part. What is on the cup that he finds, when it appears to Fearfeed, he is able to see written on the stone of the Grail. It says, "If any Templar of the community should, by the grace of God, become ruler of a foreign peoples, let him ensure that they are given their rights." That's what's written on the cup, which is the cup of stone. And that's the end of the story. Oh, no, it's not. What happens is that Fearfeed and Rapaz de Joy, who was the carrier of the Grail, the queen, de Joy, probably something like in French, they go off, they get married, and they give birth, they go to India, and they give birth to Prester John, who was that mythical keeper of the kingdom that everyone ended up searching for. And of course, Parsifal and his great love, Conduit of War, which means channel of love. they go off, they marry, and they have a child, and their descendants continue in the service of the Grail, which stays on Earth. And we can make guess goes through the cycles of life over and over again. So those are basically some of those versions of the story. Questions, comments? Huh? On the stone, actually, it's not exactly that way to come. If any Templar of the Knights, if any Templar of the community should, by the grace of God, become ruler of a foreign people, let him ensure that they are given their rights. What do you get? Oh, around in that same period, that same 50-year period. No later than 1225. An extraordinary idea for the time. Yes?
I'm reminded of a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I can't think of the name of it, but I'm wondering whether that, I think it has to do with Arthur returning from his journey. Would that relate to the same journey?
Probably. I mean, it would have been one of those later takeoffs on this material. Everyone is taking off on this basic story in one way or another. Now, what Jesse Weston says is that what we got here is really a memory of an early ritual. And we don't know what it means, but the Grail procession and its various forms is somehow key to this early, agrarian, goddess-based ritual. And each of the authors is somehow taking off on that. There's lots of research, I won't go into it, showing what are called the four halls of the Grail, the cup, the spear, the lance, the dish, as connected to these early Celtic rituals, and in fact were considered the treasures of the Irish gods and all of that stuff. I'm only giving like the slightest glimpse of some of things like that, including that the tarot emerged at the same time that the Grail myths did. They probably were created by the Knights Templar. There's a whole code in there indicating the secrets of their own Gnostic forms and esoteric forms of Christianity. And in fact, it is the temperance card, and this is what blows my mind as I've been doing the piece, because one of the things we were working out with Killian, who plays the Lady of the Fountain, is the pouring of the water into the cup, and I knew I was taking it somehow from that image of the tarot, and then I read it, in fact, in the symbology of the tarot, it is that temperance card which does in fact signify the Grail. And I discovered in relation to the piece and all the information, there was tremendous correspondence that I never even, was aware of. So I'm just continuing to be intrigued by all of these things. So the tarot came up at the same time, and as I say, numbers play a part, numerology plays a part, astrology is in there, as well as the mystical. Diane said the other day, I was trying out the seminar in New York, how to fly. And after listening, she said, what did you say? It's a roadmap for what?
Oh, toward enlightenment, for a journey.
And it goes off in so many different directions, so many different aspects. I asked Janet, was it Father Van Dam first of all? And she said, yes, it was. Gave me the name of the girl. He was a Jesuit priest who founded the movement in Holland with the 5 Dutchmen. It was Van Ginniken's idea. I said, now did Van Ginniken know this Grail myth and all the different aspects of it? And she said, yeah, he did. He knew what he was doing. And it was for those reasons of that mystical, and the idea of the journey more than the search, which is what it's all about. That it's in the course of the journey that one finally achieves the enlightenment, and that the conscious striving keeps you from the Grail, but it's in the letting go to the journey and to the process of evolution as you're moving toward it, that in fact that is there, here, like the Celtic overworld.
How is it in the Celtic interpretation and the time of paradise, or the time that there was a balance between the genders, the women and the men, and there was no rape, and there was no sexual abuse of the women? And there was this time.
According to Chrétien de Troyes.
Well, and according to feminist anthropology,
Yes.
and archaeology, and Turkey and Eastern and all Europe, where there was a time, where it was a time, and that was a community time.
Yeah.
There is good basis research.
This is another question that comes up, and it appears everywhere. Every religious tradition has its version of its time in paradise, and then somehow it's lost.
And the goddess was universally worshipped then.
Yes, and one of and in my readings, many of the authors are questioning is in fact this cross-cultural existence the remnant of a collective memory of a time when it in fact did exist. And anthropologists are now accumulating the evidence that seems to indicate that at least 5,000 years before Christ, in the area of Old Europe, Mesopotamia, and Crete, there was in fact for 6,000 years a culture of Neolithic agrarian peoples who, when they dig up the stuff, they find no items of war. Yet they were doing metallurgy. They were sophisticated enough to create the technology, and they did not. For 6,000 years in human history. And what they're digging up are being barbed icon of the goddess and a clear devotion to her. Well, the round table is, of course, a remnant of that also. The idea of the round table is that no one would be at the head of the table. That all of the knights were of equal words, including Arthur, and that they would share and also it was Merlin, who was a pagan, who was Christianized, who in fact created the round table, and it was also supposed to be remnant of all the suns and the moons and the stars in the universe, and it was a very nature oriented symbol that was about egalitarianism. Here's the theatrical premise. We're going to talk about the circle and the light, which is the Holy Grail. The first is that, in going to the oratories, that oratory is a Grail temple. It is a place where it is being kept. It is almost as if we were remembering the time when it's being kept by women. And when you enter this temple, what you find are maidens, weeping women, crones who are called mothers in this piece, and a guardian mother who is the holder and keeper of the Grail, and a wounded king who is also part of it. You also find a lady of the fountain, who is keeper of waters and of the well, and a bard, who it seems appropriate, who came in accidentally because we lost one of our mothers along the way, and we needed someone to take the line, so the bard emerged. And it's appropriate, it seems like it should have always been there. The bard is the one who kept the story alive. And in myth, it's one who keeps the collective memory, who tells the story of origins of the tribe. And in fact, hopefully see that that's quite appropriate to this character. Now, the circle and the light. Why? Now we know about the chalice and the blade. Why the circle and the light? Right? Why did I choose to go into this other way of looking at it? And there are lots of reasons, just because I needed something different than the circle, than the chalice and the blade or the usual ones. But for me, the point, the chalice is one, as you see in the myth, it has so many shapes, so many forms. There's something about the circle which seems more important. As a geometrical form of the earth, of physical life, we know, first of all, that it certainly implies this kind of wholeness and healing and balance which the myth is about. The word thing, here's the word thing. Looking at the word for healing, comes out of this word, which is Celtic and Greek, the goddess Helen, the goddess of light. Healing and light, they go together. Also, the word for holy, from the Celtic and German, also relates to the goddess of life. So we've got here's a word family, when you go to the dictionary, where light, healing, health, holy, whole, all come from the same root word. Circle, the wholeness, and the light. Which substitutes, in a way, for the blade, which I know it must have ritual reasons and trying to move it a step further away from something with so many violent associations. Don't do that. Go ahead.
It's like, I had a discussion with a friend of mine who's an acupuncturist, and we got deep into that. She uses needles to heal. She uses a sharp-pointed object. She uses a spear or a blade to heal. And we talked about the intention of what you have in mind with what you're using. It can be for healing or for harm. Also, in American Indian way of looking at arrows, there's 3 different kinds of arrows. There are arrows that you go to war with, and they're generated and done up a certain way. There are arrows that you hunt with, and there are arrows that you pray with. So it's the intention.
Now, I was interested in understanding something in all of this about the spiritual journey and the relationship of the physical and the spiritual. The cup is in many ways, and that's how we get our logo. This is the logo. It's sort of like, thanks to Pam Cole, our artist in residence was created here, and it's also in the candle over there. The cup is kind of that axis mundi, which the Grail capsule is also. The axis mundi is the point where all of them come together. The above, the below, meeting on the earth. So the spiritual life, the openness of the upturned triangle to receive. And in the other direction, taking up from the earth below and coming together in the middle. The Grail cup is in fact a kind of axis mundi in the same way that the Grail capsule functions in the myth. And there's something about energy here. That the physical may very well be just a denser form of spirit, and the spirit may very well be a lighter form of the physical. And that somewhere in there is the threshold between spirit and matter. And the circle and the light, and bringing the light in as the correlate of the sword, seemed to me to begin to express that. So there's another way of, and the light can certainly blind, can certainly, be that penetrating. And I learned some interesting things about light from a book by Dr. Dejan, which is also up here, the history of light and mind, or something like that. And there's this experiment where you fill up a box with light, and you make sure that there is no way that there are any forms visible within it, and you look into this box, and what you see is absolute darkness. But when you insert a rod into this box that seems apparently dark, but filled with light which you cannot see the light, you insert the rod, suddenly there's a form, and zing, you see that there's light. The only way you can see light is in the presence of form. And what that means is we all need each other to see the light. We need all of the forms of the physical world to be able to perceive that great light, which by itself is invisible. So it were those kinds of things playing around in this title of The Circle of the Light. So the piece is encased within these 2 points. So we begin in the paradisal state. I didn't know it was a paradisal state in the schema, but I began with the circle. So when you come to the piece tonight, as you enter into this temple of the Grail, the memory of when you're being held by women, we begin in the roundness of all that is. We are a center in the curve of all that exists. And it's there that we begin, in that initial state of wholeness and oneness, which to the metaphors of poetry and then the opening section allude to many things. Certainly they allude to the mother, which is the beginning of all creation. But also that personal journey, that time, memory of when you were one with something else, including your own time of being held within a mother. So that as those kinds of memories that are being alluded to, you will see many, you will be hearing about circles, you'll be seeing spirals. You'll be seeing spirals in the forms of weeping women working, what we call these spiral strands, the memory, the DNA, the coming together of things in these strands. Spirals we find is the basic form of all of life. It comes in a spiral. The interesting thing about a spiral, too, is that in questions of time, which in the myth, there's always this real time and otherworldly time, that the spiral, and also the distinction in the Celtic version of time, which is the cycle, and in the Christian version is the linear, the straight lines, where apocalyptic time, the spiral brings The cyclical time together with linear time. So the cycle is not just a circle repeating itself over and over. And the straight line is not just a straight line, but it's a circle that's going somewhere. It's in motion, it's moving, and it's not just repeating itself over and over again. It's going deeper and deeper and deeper towards something. But it is a circle that keeps coming around and around and around. So then you will find that spiral very prevalent in there. And of course the spiral dance. One of the maidens who does the spiral dance, one of the rehearsals, says, listen, I really, what is that spiral dance? When we do that spiral dance, and then when we have the big bang with the drum and it's over, what is that? Is that about, what did you ask me, Ali? Did you give me a possibility at that point, or did I, remember? Anyway, is this about me being born? I said, yeah, it could be. That's one of the possibilities. But certainly it was one of the thoughts in my mind. This idea, not only us, of course, it's ultimately about all of creation, pushed out there and out there on its own. And so for me, the journey is the end of the paradigm when we are born into the human condition. And now what you see is people walking in grids and metronome in real time, as we know it now, in place. And so we move from into that kind of time and into that kind of journey. But within that, there is the sense, there's the memory, and there is that glimpse sometimes of what the Grail might be, this tremendous longing that you have, and so they point you. And I'd like you to just take a moment right now to remember a time in your own life, recently, in the past, however you took to see it, when you might have gone like that for something. That's it. Think for a moment. What was that thing that you were pointing to? Feel free in a moment or a few moments just to say a word or two about it if you want to.
Long ago, in 51, when I first came to Grailvile, I met the Grail, and that was it. And there was absolutely nothing that could keep me from coming back.
And was it what you thought it was? Because sometimes we go like that, we think it's the Holy Grail, and it's not.
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
It was enough what I thought it was, but I'm still around.
Right. Anybody else?
For me, it was retirement. Yes, I want to travel around the world. I want to be born again. I get to do all these different things, and I can sleep late and read books as much as I want. And it's undefined time where the spiral really has a whole lot more meaning as an image now. It was helpful to hear you talk about it. And that's the way it's been. It's like the story has no attainment. I mean, it was like, yes, but just for a time, a space, but not some final thing.
And that's what happens to babies, of course. They see it, and they do this wonderful dance of happy things, and it's like, yes, there's the innocence of the young also, isn't it, and parts of people starting out on the journey, but then they stop again, and then they suddenly realize, wait, where is it going on? No, it's over here. No, it's over here. That sense. You thought you saw it, you did see it. So, right, it was good, but then it's like gone. Right? And we're getting lost. Ultimately, this getting lost part in this journey, inevitably, for each of us, will bring us to, guess where? The wasteland. There is no way of avoiding the entry to the wasteland. What do you think the wasteland is? Can you think of any concrete things in our own time, in our own land, or in our own soul that feel like that for us? The wasteland is a place where nothing will grow. The present. It's depression. Yeah, that's right. Because, buried. Yeah. That's one of the qualities of the wasteland, ultimately. Yeah.
Well, it's a place where you have to go where you are, you must be in order for the light to have any kind of meaning. It's like the box.
You know, right. I'm thinking of concrete things. You must go to the wasteland. I'm thinking of what are the things that for you, are the wasteland. Probably though when we are in the midst of it, it does feel like the wasteland as far as that sense of despair that we were talking about and the loss of hope that ending my brother. And to have so many retrospect and that's part of the journey too, moving out of the wasteland. And to have that retrospective vision of, yes, there was something gained by that. Because we must do it, we must go through it, and it does bring us further. Hopefully, if we start asking, what is this place? Why am I here? Why do I suffer? Why do they suffer? Why are we doing this? It's just automatic. Questions start, we're in the wasteland, and we start asking questions. We don't understand.
I think culturally we're taught not to. This is the question. Because I think that the invitation can be the taught. And I think there's a lot. But I think culturally we don't give that place. There's honor it.
And probably each point in our journey is a different right question. And as the line says, be careful. Because it is not with this, please be careful with it, for it is not so much finding the answer that heals you, but living the question, being willing to live with the question and not jump to the answer, to allow the contradictions, to allow that unknown to exist, and not think, I got to know the answer. Just live with it. And in fact, that is probably more bringing us into coming closer than thinking we've got the answer. Okay, the wasteland is gone, and it's all over. And asking that question, if we truly enter it and we come upon the right question, the question that touches into the very heart of our being, what does it do? It brings us forth onto the quest. The question leads us to the quest. And the quest is different from the journey. The journey, everybody's on the journey. You breathe, you live, you walk through the journey. Life is a journey. But the quest, the journey is purpose. The quest is a journey that has a sense of call, or mission, or bound. And we understand that we are in so much consciousness. We understand that we are going towards something. We may not know what it is. We may not know how to get there. But we are committed to the quest, to the path of commitment, not to accident or coincidence. Yes?
I have difficulty, Sharon, separating the journey from the quest, as you were talking, and as we talked a little earlier, because for me the word journey has always had the it built into it. Going somewhere. Is there another word you could use instead? I mean, if I say I'm on a journey, that to me suggests I'm going somewhere.
Right.
Could we find another word for journey that is not, that is...
You might guess it's right. Yeah. And it's just, I know you understand the distinction I'm making, and maybe that I'm not using the right word for it. Unfortunately, I don't use the word journey in the piece, I don't think. Just say we are walking.
One word you added to quest is commitment, and that makes a difference for me between journey and quest.
See, when you go off on the quest, you enter into the darkness. There's no way that you cannot go into the darkness into the underground, whether it's into your unconscious or into the dark places of the world, and consequences can sometimes be that abandonment, which can lead us to a dark time. But that dark time is different than despair. That dark time, it might still be possible to contain some hope or to find it within yourself. And in the ritual tonight, the questers do end up going into the dark. We all do. And out of that dark comes the reminder of the time when you were not afraid, when you knew that you were part of something more than yourself. And you have that memory, you keep that memory alive. And the message comes from the Lady of the Fountain: use the light that is within you, and use the path of enlightenment. To know that light that is within you, to use your own light to return to the source of light. And so that becomes probably the heart of it all. That ability to do that. And the light that was within me, and here we can start getting into me questions around physics and energy. The light that is within me is also part of the source of light. And so it's the light without and the light within, the God moves without and the God moves within. And that we're all part of that. And we know things about light also, what we know about light, but we don't know what light is. Is it a particle? Is it a wave? How does it do? How does that happen? No, but scientists have not been able to define it, but the best way they can do is say both things at the same time. Right. It is both a particle which can act as a source of those things, but it's also a wave that acts like a spiral. It can be both things. Once again, paradox of contradiction. The two mountains, the earth and the middle way. And within the ritual tonight, so we, passing out of that darkness, once again returning to the spiral dance and that other kind of birth into the light, and becoming, of the cup in that moment, knowing of course that the cycle, or maybe not depending upon if any of us is left tonight, that might really be it. You might be very lucky and it might really happen to you. Or it can happen as part of that cyclical process that goes on and on. So the fact is, maybe it is like, when you really have it, maybe it is like Abraham. Maybe it is like that might be it. But otherwise what we get throughout the time is to glimpse of the Grail. And it goes out and goes around again and comes around again. I would like you to think for a moment, different from the moment when you went like that and you went for it. It might have been a new car, but no, that wasn't it. Or this was, no, that's not it. I'm still not that person, yes, I had that love. That was no, that's not it either. All the time growing and stuff like that. No, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. But there is, perhaps within most of us, I would hope it was that moment when you go like that. And it really wasn't it, but it can't hold it. But it comes around again. That moment when you know, yes, it is true, there is life, there is this thing, it is real, I know it, and I'm going to build my life around it. And in retrospect, you know you were right. You didn't do the wrong thing. In fact, it was your grace. And if you think for a moment when it was that you did have your glimpse of that grace. And think now, and think at the end also. But tonight, in the ritual, the audience will be invited to share when they've had their glimpse of the Holy Grail, or where they are hoping to find it. And you will be invited to share, and the hope is that through this process of understanding and already used this stuff, but it's clarifying it when you bring it up, that through this process that you may be able to truly bring something to that sharing with people that can then inspire all of us in our own journey. We come together as a round table at this ritual moment. And over the round table, people are going to be asked to share about their understanding and their mode of perception of that grail. So I would ask you all to keep that question in your mind as we went to the ritual tonight. And if you will be willing to share that with some others in the way that you are able to do that. Because if we really bring our heart to this event this evening, something wonderful will happen for all of us. Those of us who have been working on this for a number of weeks have found within that a process that relates to our own lives. Each of the people who are participating in this ritual have become, throughout the time, more and more personally engaged in the lines, in the movements, in the actions, and relating it to their own lives. And together, coming clearer, and I'm hearing them say, this is about me, this is about my life. And I am asking those people and myself to bring that truth with us tonight and to be willing to be it among you and those who are still to come. And I will ask you the same thing, to bring this truth, this longing, even if it's just a wasteland at this point, to bring that with you tonight and to be willing to feel that and to see it among us. And we could make something very magical happen together. and we will be touched. Find that light, even if we know the circle will have to come around again. There will be that moment. We will have all of our energy fields in it, and each of us will be being affected by the other's energy field.
In your play, do you depict the wasteland?
So when there is a procession, there is a wasteland procession. You will see it, the king will announce it. You go to the end of the line where you find what you were not looking for, the wasteland. And at that point, there will be a procession of what we call dead things. And some of you, if you wish, could become part of the procession.
One part the maidens come and they go to the straight line. Is that part of the journey to get there, that they're going to the place that has to grow to be able to get into the spiral or the spiral?
Well, we start out making people do the spiral dance.
Right.
Then, which by the way, the spiral dance also suggests the serpent, which is also connected with the god. So that's another, that's a side line. All right, so they do the spiral dance. And then there's a moment of birth. Then you'll hear the static. Lights come up, and you've got the making into a great formation. They're born into space, time, and reality, and we know it. And they are just, they're following the code, they're doing the things, they're doing the walk, they're searching, and right? And then they get this glimpse of something, and they go like that, right? And they enjoy that glimpse, and then they realize they're lost, and they can't get back to it, and maybe that wasn't even the real thing, and now what do I do? And that's when you come into the wasteland. When you're willing to give up all the illusions, or they're forced from you. And when you come face to face with it. What did you say after the spiral? The birth? Well, coming into our own space-time reality. That's a personal birth, that's from the mother, or just symbolic of that existence.
Now, that's not written down where we're following.
That's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
What this does is gives you a certain amount more access to this material. No, there's no script. It's not going to. It's meant to be present to the experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Someday we might print it out, but I don't know what. But for now, it's like the ritual that we do with spirit. And here's the other thing. Family has these rational minds, and they're really good for stuff. They really are. It's really important. Our rational minds are the other part of us. They really are important. But I think we haven't learned to allow part of us that doesn't experience truth in a rational way as much free. And the thing about poetry, and also about ritual too, is that it breaks through that point where things are like everything's making sense and something else is going on. And it's not about logical, oh, this means that. Oh, now she's going to the birth canal. Oh, this is the part where she's on. It's not, so that when Jean tells me, or even you perhaps, you came away, you had a feeling about the thing, but you didn't really understand it. That's okay. That's okay. And the point is, and what we want to try to achieve, and of course these things give more information and more access. Absolutely. I'm not denying that. But ultimately, in the moment itself, it really is about going off on whatever tangent is suddenly hitting you, you recognize it, and then things go into another level of consciousness, and you have left ordinary space-time reality, and things are happening by virtue of suggestion in the poetic mind, which is also the mystical mind. And so it isn't important to understand everything in a rational way. It is full of references, it's true. And the more I read this and do these things more, man, I didn't even realize I was making that connection. You know what happened when we come back? We do this poem that I wrote in 1982, and it's talking about, then we are one together again in circles. And earlier on, I had this line, we are gathered together in circles. And I think there was a way to see when I was writing this thing, I wasn't completely in charge of it, which is just as well, because probably wouldn't have been a very good poem. So, there's a way in which architecture was created there that even I wasn't fully cognizant of all of these plans. And so what you're being invited into an experience of something. You have certain materials, certain access now, I think, that people just come in first won't have. That's the truth. That's the truth. Things will have more to do for you, and that's good. But ultimately, it's not about an intellectual exercise. Oh, this goes back to that, and that goes back to that. Yes, it might come up with interesting points, but ultimately, it's about your willingness to experience for yourself in your own life, your journey, where it takes you to the way plan, where you know it, how you know it, what is the question, what is it doing for you, and listen to the questions that are coming to you. Are you willing to respond to those questions? Are any of those questions your own? And where is your quest? What is it that you are willing to give your life for? Because that's what it comes down to. You think of the old night you're willing to go out and sacrifice your life. A life sacrifice is being asked for here. What are we willing to give our lives for? That is the heroic moment. That is the heroic journey. That is. And this quest will take you where you never asked to go. It will show you what you never asked to know. It will make you work at things you never asked to do.
It will ask everything of you and give you nothing in return. And leave you with nothing you can call your own. It will leave you empty and ready for your heart's deepest longing. Could I add here, Sarah? Yes. That it's a tremendously moving experience to be in a program like this with Sharon. I want to be in a program with you. Yeah. Amen. 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 Thank you.
So what did we just find out? Did you hear it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Is Penny in it, or is it just people on staff? Oh, those are people on staff. I wrote this for people from my poetry writing workshops. I was out there looking for names and weeping women. We got Jeannie in, who's the daughter of a real woman, and in the beginning we started out as a maiden tour, people. But it was ready. You know what the test was? Can you be available for 4 weeks of rehearsal? Say yes to me. Everybody who is doing this, there are no professionals here. These are people who live and work at or around railroads. And they are doing this thing, and they are rehearsing, and they're doing it well. It will not be perfect. But that's not it. Because it's not about the technical perfection. It will be perfect in the moment, in its own time. But they are striving, they're working for a certain kind of excellence. And so this is the Grailvile setting and the Grailvile community doing this, but other communities, others can do this. Anybody can do this. That's one thing we want to do. Another thing we want to teach you for tonight, you can be part of. Jeannie, you want to
These are some lines that are very early in the ritual. And
during the spiral,
yes, you beat your heels to make it sound like a heartbeat. And it comes kind of in the part of the ritual where you can picture yourself with the mother, if you want, as part of the mother, physically, with the heartbeat of the mother. And it made me really think. I never thought about my life before I was born, I guess. That you were, and I think Sharon has a line, you're riding on the waves of the floating in the water and the beating of the heart. And I guess as a child inside the mother, that's what you're experiencing. And that's part of what she's trying to show in this part of the ritual. And so when we start making the heart beat, if any of you'd like to join us, You can make it sound like a heartbeat, and that comes in with the chant that we put with it. And the chant goes, out from the dark we come, forgetting the time we were one. Out from the dark we come, forgetting the time we were one. Out from the dark we come, forgetting the time we were one. Whether you're one is one with the mother, or one with the circle of life, or the spiritual oneness, or however you feel that. I think that's part of what she's trying to bring out there. And join us when we start doing that. Get caught up in it.
We will come back, but that's what's done, which is a reminder of the heartbeat. And that time comes back to you when you hear it, and when it stops.
I would like you to say for them the lines at the very end about light. That the first time I didn't hear them the first time I went to the performance enough to really think about them.
That entering life and crossing to another dimension?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. And I think you need time to think about those lines, but if you'll just hear them tonight, you won't really have time to think about them.
This takes place when we go into the dark. It probably will be completely dark because of daylight saving time and all of that. But you know, essentially it's kind of nice over the shadows and that one. So in the dark, you will hear a lullaby, and then you will hear the reminders coming from the bard. Remember back in time. Once upon a time, you were held within the mother, rising on a deep wave. You were not crazy. Remember that. And then, use your own life. Return to the source. This is called practicing eternity. That's why I say it's nothing. That's why I say. Then, what happens? We get these lines. Entering life, we cross into another domain. We must learn to leave behind all that we hold dear from the past and cleave only to the phenomena of life. At every level, down to quantum, particles, waves, locations, all must be left like soiled sandals at the threshold of the temple. So it's talking about life, but it's also talking about other things. But that's a reference certainly to this question of that life which no one knows exactly what it is, and ultimately we have to even let go of that and just hold on to that life. Somebody wants to say something? Isn't that our essence? What? The life? Life there. This is part of the insights that might be coming. And in fact, something that you will be invited to share at the appropriate time. When you do share, I just want to ask that you stand up, you speak slowly, clearly, and loudly. The oratory is a very beautiful space, and it is sacred, and it is very beautiful, and it has terrible acoustics. And that's a shame. It's great to sing it. Very great to sing it, right? Great to sing it. But it's very hard to speak it. And all of our players this evening are aware of that, and they're going to be doing the best that they can and the best you've been able to work with. But I want to give you that information. If you want to be heard, you'll go slow, you'll go loud. When first you go slow, you'll go clear, and then you'll go loud. And if it sounds like screaming, that's okay. It's not screaming. It's getting heard. Yes. Yes.
just to connect with that, Sharon, if we do that, other people who have not heard you say that will do it, and if you don't do it, everybody will mumble and nothing will be done.
And before I leave here, this is called having a plan. Before we go, I want at least 2, possibly 3 brave people to say they are willing to be number 1, number 2, and number 3. And then other people join in. Who is willing to be number 1? To do what? When have you had your glimpse of the Holy Grail? Where are you hoping to find it? You may not know the answer now, but you may have a stirring within yourself that you know that there are words that you can put to it. No, that was No, that's the list. That's the point at which you've come through the wasteland and the asking of the questions, and then the lady of the fountain, and then the round table appears, and the lady of the fountain invites people to help each other on the journey, going towards the quest, and to share with each other your own insights, the light that you have known along the way, so that we can help one another and comfort each other in the search.
And is it audience formation, like 11 times a member?
It's actually, all right, so they think the altar section, it will come out in concentric circles and then come out a little like the center of the cup. So you've got a concentric circle and the main playing floor is like this. This is the main playing area. And then also the mothers are on all steps. And that's the main area. And then the circle closes when it's all playing and goes around the altar at the time and the grail comes into the light. And the circle is complete. So it's like this, really.
The audience, you know, on the platform.
No, we're all around the auditorium, concentric circles. It's a very friendly and intimate.
And the lights are not terribly bright.
No. Not when you're forward of it. Oh, that's cute. I don't know. Well, okay, the last time we had about 100 people.
Sharon, one thing I'd like to share, when I was there last time, you're so caught up in the play and the feeling of what's going on, that once the audience started participating, no one, I felt, was really on display. It was more that someone was getting up and echoing what you were already feeling, and it was just kind of resonating your own thoughts. And I didn't, at least for me as an audience member, I didn't feel as though I was staring at this person. It was more that they were just voicing my own feelings about what was going on in different forms. But if that helps you, I don't think that anyone was really on display and for everyone else to be critical of it. It's more helping to form more clearly the thoughts that everyone else is feeling already.
Problem number 2.
Right here, number 1. Okay, number 1. Cheryl, and then Cheryl.
I think I know
Where? Number 3? Number 4. And I have to let other people join us. Number 4? And I don't be surprised if some of those people just jump right in and they might be interrupted. There might be some, I think we had a planted that time in the minute intersection was issued. Somebody in the back who I never saw before, I never saw again. So, all right, but at least we know we're set to get this thing rolling, to model it. And you know it take a lot of time, a few minutes. You want to be brief so that other people get a chance. It's not the story of the life, right? It's about really trying to come to a crystallization of what this insight of the Grail and your own quest is about. And as concrete as you can be, to journey. I'd like to like good poetry. Good poetry is very concrete, it's not abstract. It makes definite things in definite times, in definite places. And with, as we do this evening, with in the ritual, the Russian Hallelujah. Some of us know it. What we can do to just maybe we can sing along, which I know we will join out. Either you want to try, just let you go through it so they can hear it.
Those of us who know it, sing and bless the music once. That's the first part, and then we go into the very simple line, the same line. Don't lag. Back to the beginning. Some of us will sing parts to this tonight. This is the melody, and we count on you to keep the melody going and to keep the music flowing and not to sit down.
Are you holding it in the alphabet?
I'm sorry?
Are you holding the E-I? Is that what it is?
Emphasize the oo and not the e. So the e just sort of glides in. Again, from the beginning.
And just to know, the way you do this, you will start the song, and she will start off with the first hallelujah. Hallelujah. And then we all connect. Hallelujah. We let that first hallelujah come out with Eva, and then